Which vegetables grow better in the shade? Stick around to the end and I'll also give you my top tips on growing your veggies in the shade to get the best harvest. Not all gardens are created equal and not all of us are lucky enough to have land that faces the sun. There are, however, luckily, some plants will grow really well even if they barely get any sunshine. Most plants prefer to have at least 4 to 8 hours of sunlight a day. This doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be direct sunlight, but at least some brightness so that they can turn that sun into some nutrients for the plants. Swiss chard, which we know as silver beet, grows really well even if it's not getting a lot of sun. Its dark green leaves are able to convert the sun, even if it's not getting very much light, into the nutrition it needs very easily. Brassicas are another option. Now brassicas are a large group of plants that are all cousins and they all stemmed from the same plant way back in the day. So these are your big dark leafy things that all taste a little bit like cabbage. So cabbages, cauliflowers, broccolis, what are the ones with the tiny little cabbage things? Brussels sprouts. Blah. And collards and kale. Now these all have big, thick, dark, leafy greens and they are really good at converting whatever sunlight that they can get access to into nutrition. Cabbage actually grows better, tighter heads if you can grow them out of the direct sun. They do take a lot longer to grow, however, so there is that trade-off. Lettuce and salad greens are another option. A lettuce does prefer to get about 3 or 4 hours of sunlight a day, but if it can't get that, it will make do. You'll find its leaves become a bit thicker and a little bit tougher. Lettuce doesn't actually like lots of hot sun. It actually prefers to grow in under plants and in the shade, especially in the middle of the hot summer. You'll find that they tend to go quite bitter and they bolt really easily. In the heat of the summer, hiding them in under the shade of other plants or around the shady side of the house is a really good way to make sure you're getting delicious, tasty, tender lettuce that hasn't bolted and gone bitter and gross. Asian greens like mustard greens, mitsuna and pak choi, they all do really well in shady areas as well. Now there are some root crops you can grow in the shade as well. Carrots will grow in the shade, but they do take quite a bit longer to germinate. Swede or Swedish turnips or rutabaga, they're all the same thing, just a different name. They'll grow well in the shade too. As do other turnips and beetroot and even potatoes will grow well without getting too much sunlight. In fact, if potatoes are exposed to too much sunlight, that is when the potatoes at the surface start going green. So if you can hide them from the sun, you're going to have less of the greening on the top. Obviously, if you can mulch them up with some straw or some mulch or even some dirt, that also will block that sun from those potatoes so you don't ruin them. Peas prefer to grow in the cooler months. So if it gets really hot and sunny where you are in the summertime, growing peas around the shady side of the house is a really great way of still getting peas all through the summer without them giving up and dying because they're too hot. There are some perennial plants that you can grow on the shady side of your house that can also provide food. Miner's lettuce will come up every winter time and they prefer to live either in the understory of a forest or around the shady damp side of your house. French sorrel is another one that doesn't mind the shade. In fact, during the heat of the summer it prefers to be shaded. And rhubarb is another one that actually prefers to not be in full sun all the time. Is your garden sunny or shady or both? Have I missed any vegetables that you can think of that grow really well in shady areas? Let me know about them in the comments below. If you're looking for herbs to grow on that shady side of the house as well, there are some that you can use. Mint, parsley and thyme all don't mind being on the shady side. However, avoid things that usually would grow in the Mediterranean that like it hot and dry. So that's rosemary, sage, and oregano. So my top tips for growing plants in the shade. Grow plants that are adapted to living in shady environments. Don't grow things that prefer full sun. Start your plants somewhere nice and warm. If they are something that you can transplant, start them in the greenhouse or somewhere nice and sunny. That will ensure that they germinate nice and quickly and that the plants start developing nice and quickly for you. Understand that growing in the shade, your plants will grow slower. However, they do tend to also have larger leaves and thicker, more nutrient-dense leaves. If you have the ability to thin out the bottom branches of some of the trees that are shading that side, by all means do so. The more light that those areas are getting, the better. And be sure to plant anything around in the shady side of the house in good, well-draining, nutrient-rich soil. Most plants that will tolerate the shade will not tolerate also having boggy, wet, heavy, clayey soil. If you've enjoyed this video, check out these other 10 plants that you can turn into flower.